We are now on the top of Daf Chav Beis Amid Beis, and we're studying the dissenting view of Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Pachos me'arba ain't tzarich lahavi korach cheres. Arba tzarich lahavi korach cheres. This is the famous sheet of Rabbi Shimon Gamliel about Lavid. All the Tanoim understood that the shear of Lavid is 3 tvachim, whereas Rabbi Shimon Gamliel understood that the shear of Lavid is 4 tvachim. So whatever we said about 3 tvachim, according to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, is correct with regard to 4 tvachim. Now the Brisa continues. V'chein shtei koros hamat'imos v'lo bezu kedei lekabel hariach v'lo bezu kedei lekabel hariach. What happens in the following scenario? The shear, the minimum width of a korah to be matir a mavui is 1 tefach. And another way of saying a tefach is kedei lekabel hariach. Hariach is a brick that they use for construction. And imagine a beam that's going, we'll call it horizontally from right to left. So you see my fingers, right? I wish I had another hand at this point, but imagine putting a brick down in this direction, right? From my chest towards the screen. Perpendicular, 90-degree angle. And this is a shear. In the days of the Talmud, they have a standard kind of brick, and they knew that a brick, a standard sized brick with its volume and its weight, would shake up a korah that was very narrow, that was less than a tefach in width. If it was a tefach in width, that's called kedei lekabel hariach. Hariach is a brick. So now we talk about 2 koros, twins, so to speak, that are going across the kosel to kosel, neither of which, in and of itself, has the necessary required width of a tefach. Im mekablos hariach l'rachbo tefach, ain't tzarech lahavi korach cheres. If he ties together, so to speak, I don't mean that literally, the 2 koros, and they're smacked together, each one supports the other one, so to speak, gives extra strength, such that when he puts a brick down in the rochav, it will hold it up. Although each korah in and of itself could not hold up the brick, it's less than a tefach in width. But when I have the 2 koros smacked together with some glue, I attach them, they will hold up a brick. And therefore he doesn't have to replace the korah. Im lav. But if even after he puts these 2 narrow koros together and attaches them, they will not be able to hold and maintain the weight of a brick that's going in this direction, we call a rochav, then he's got to bring another korah to replace this as a tikkun for the mav. Rav Shimon Gamliel Omer, and once again, we had Rav Shimon Gamliel earlier. He was mekil and expanded Lavid to 4 tvachim. Here we have a different kula, and he says in Makabel Sariach li Arko Shlosha Tvachim ain't Tzarech lahavi korach cheres. It says the following. We're going to do a different test and see whether or not we can rely and validate this twin koros. We're going to separate the koros, one from the other, and we're going to place a brick not in the width, going from me to you, but rather in the length. And that's going to give you a lot more flexibility, because when you put it to the length and you're separating one korah from the other, so as if the outer parts of each korah are going to hold up this brick that is to the length, that's a cinch. And then Eino Tzarech Lavikov, that's fine. Himlav, if the koros are not strong enough, that even if you put the brick on the length, separating one korah from the other, it's going to fall apart. Again, I don't know how you know that. Probably it means it starts shaking, or it's, you see it's getting weak. You don't want to be under there because the brick is going to fall. Then that's not a secure korah. Now the brisa continues. And this is the part of the brisa that is most relevant to us. Hayu achas lemala v'achas lemata. He now has two koros. Again, they're going across horizontally, not like we discussed before, the olos, where one was on top and one was the bottom, but they're near each other in a vertical line. Here we're talking in a horizontal line, going from left to right. And he has now two koros, but one is higher than the other. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Roim Helyona Ki'ilu Hilamata Vesatachtonu Ki'ilu Hilamal. Right? Assuming that, and we'll see other restrictions in a minute, that the distance between one korah and the other, according to Abaye at least, is less than 3 tefachim, then we apply the principle of chavot remi. And we're going to imagine that the two koros are on the same exact level. What are the other restrictions? Number one, we have a similar halacha that we discussed at the beginning of Masechet Succah, similar to Succah, where the schach has to be below 20 amos from the ground. So to the korah, in order to be visible, it's got to be a hekera, so that people realize there's a korah to be mated the mavui. It's got to be below 20 amma. And then we have another restriction, hatachtona lemata me'asor. You have to make sure that the bottom korah is not below 10 tefachim. The minimum height for a korah to be mated, to be metaken a mavui, is 10 tefachim. Now comes Rav Ashi. Remember that Rav Ashi was the one who wanted to raise a question, a contradiction to Rava. And now we're going to see how he fleshes it out. He says the following. Let's look at Rav Yossi, Rav Yehuda. One of the koros is up, one of the koros is down, and we're going to be machshir the korah, again, assuming that within 20 am of the ground and above 10 tefachim, etc. And we view this korah as if it was contiguous to the other korah. Hazeh v'zeh, toch esrim, right? If both koros are lower than esrim and above 10 tefachim, is then amrinan chavot remi. Now wait a second. What's the purpose of taking the higher korah, lowering it to the level or raising the level of lower korah? Why am I doing that? Because I want to create one korah that'll be equal to a tefach. And again, we're qualifying now Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda was addressing a case where each korah was less than a tefach, and he's trying to combine the two korahs in order to equal a sum total of one tefach, so we have a valid korah. Each korah is less than a tefach. That's against Rava. The amrinan chavot rebi afal gavdil less bei tefach. This is the question that Rav Ashi presented to Rav Kahana after Rav Kahana had presented Rava. Rava's principle was there's no chavot rebi if you have less than a width of a tefach. Here we see clearly from Rav Yossi, Rav Yehuda, that we're talking about a korah that is less than one tefach of width, and we're combining the two korahs through the methodology of chavot remi, even though we don't have a width of a tefach. Amalei, Rav Kahana wants to now protect Rava. Keep in mind, by the way, historically, Rav Kahana and Rav Ashi are one generation after Rava. Tritz v'ema hach. Here's the way we're going to reinterpret Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehud, who says that we see the Korah Elyona as if it's down on the same level as the Korah Tachtona, the top with the bottom. Bilvad, Shalo Tehei Elyona Lamala V'Esrim, Ela V'Toch Esrim. Tachtona, V'Tachtona Smuchala V'Pachos V'Shlosha, and it requires 3 Tfachim close. And then we apply the principle of Lavud. Inami, Bilvad Shalo Tehei Tachtona Lamata V'Asora. Inami is not another answer, it's just supplementing, rounding it off. The bottom Korah does not dip below the height of 10 tefachim from the ground. El Lamalami, so it's above 10 tefachim. V'Elyona smuchala v'pachos v'shlosha. And always we have to insist that the distance between the Elyona and the Tachtona is 3 tefachim. But all this is assuming that each Korah has a width of 1 tefach. Avo, Shlosha, even the less they tefach, lo amrina chavot to forbid. Rabbi Yossi now is being interpreted as if the Korah is less than a tefach in width, then if there's a distance of Shlosha tefachim between one Korah and another, which means I can no longer attach them through the operation, the method of lavud, then the only method I have at my disposal is chavot remi. I cannot apply chavot remi in this case because the width of each of these 2 koros is less than a tenth. And that's the end of that sugya. Now we begin a different sugya. The Mishnah says shetzilsa merubsa michamsa kshera, and you have more shade than sunlight. Haki adadi, the implication of our Mishnah here, this is the later Mishnah at the beginning of Perek HaYosher, is that if it was ki adadi, let's underline those words, ki adadi, those are the key words for this sugya. If there's an equal amount of sunlight and shade, sula. Our Mishnah says you must get to the point of tselsa meruba. If it's not tselsa meruba, if you can't win the game with the shade, if it's a teku, stalemate, then the sukkah is invalid. Let's go back to the Mishnah at the beginning of Masechet Sukkah. But Tanan v'idach pirkin in the other parak, the first parak. It says in the Mishnah, Chamsa merubsa mitzelsa psula. If there's more sunlight than shade, then it's possible. Implying that ki ha ki adadi shera. If they were equal 50-50, a stalemate, then the sukkah is valid. Do we not have a contradiction here about the case of equal? In other words, which way does it go? Is it the way this Mishnah says that in order for it to be kshera, you need tzelsa meruba? Or is it the way the Mishnah says at the beginning, it's going to be invalid if it's chamsa meruba mitzels? And the nafkamina is going to be when it's equal. Lo kash. Kan milamala, kan milamata. Fantastic chiddush that just blows us out of the water. It's a whole different understanding of schach and the way schach operates. The Gemara is saying now that what's critical is looking at the schach lamala. We tend to mistakenly think that everything depends upon the floor of the sukkah. Take a look at the floor of the sukkah. Is it mostly sun or mostly shade? No. We're going to look at the schach itself. When our Mishnah tells us that you, again, it's a little confusing when we say our Mishnah. What I mean is the Mishnah that we're doing now in the second paragraph, and the Mishnah says that you need Tzelsa, Merubsa, Michamsa. If it's equal, it's invalid. Then we're talking about the Succah itself. That's called Lamala. And the Gemara is operating with a fascinating premise, which I frankly, if you gentlemen can help me with the physics of it, I don't exactly intuit this, but the theory is that when the sunlight hits the Succah on top of the Sukkah, and then it penetrates below the top of the Sukkah, meaning beyond the Succah, and it reaches the ground, the sunlight spreads. Let's say my Sukkah, I don't know, what should I say, is 10 amos high. So there's like a 10 amma drop, so to speak, between the Succah and the ground, and the sunlight that's coming through the Succah, in a normal case where I have, not too sparse, not too dense of Succah. And in that drop of 10 amos, the sun spreads around. So if I have an equal amount of Succah and, let's say, non-Succah up on top of the Sukkah, then by definition, it's possible. It's going to be Chamsa Merubsa Mitzelsa. And therefore, Lamala, I must have Tzelsa Merubsa Michamsa, meaning you have to have more Succah than sunlight, because if it's equal, then by golly, the sun is going to spread throughout. And I'm trying to think of a word here. Just give me a second. I got a good word for you. Diffuses. The sun diffuses. As it goes down, that drop from the top to the bottom. And when it diffuses, you get more sunlight. Maybe it is intuitive. Now that I think about it. I'm convincing myself. 2 hours ago, I wasn't convinced. Anbi Lamata. Now we go back to the first Mishnah. And if you recall, the first Mishnah said that if it's Chamsa Merubsa Mitzelsa, then it's possible. Which implying that if it was equal on, in terms of shade and sunlight, it would be kosher. Why? Because now we're looking Lamata. The sun has already been diffused, the light of the sun. And if I see on the bottom it's equal, that's fine. But when I get to Lamala, if it's going to be equal Lamala, I know it's going to be mostly sunlight Lamata. Rav Papa gives this an idiomatic expression. I knew Dami Ichi. This is what people use a phrase that when you have light and you move away from its original source, it spreads, it diffuses. And again, this would be an interesting experiment for a young child, in a science museum. Kizuza Miliel, let's say you have a roof or some sort of a blockage and you puncture a hole in it. Very small hole. It's the size of a zuz. A zuz is a small coin. And Lamala, when you hold it up to the sun is piercing through a very small hole. Ke'istra milutachas. If you look on the ground, you're going to see sun the size of an istra. An istera is a larger matbea than a zuz. So you started with a zuz and you end with an istera. How so? The sun apparently pierces through a small opening and then it diffuses. Uba can be bias if you have very, very thick, dense schach, such that it looks like a ceiling of a house. Can't even see the stars at night. Nevertheless, it is kosher. Whether that's lechatchila or only b'diavad, that's going to be an issue. Ton Rabbana, we learned in the Brisa. Hama uba kimin bias. Afal pisha ein hakochavim nirim. Mitocha kshera. Again, many poskim will say kshera is b'diavad. Lechatchila, you shouldn't have such dense schach. You should be able to see the stars at night when you look up towards the heavens during schach, sukkah. Ein kochave chama nir mitocha. Now, what happens if you put such dense schach that during the daylight you can't even see the sun? You're basically in virtual darkness. Beit Shammai poslim ubeisel machshir. Beit Shammai says that that's possible even b'diavad. It looks like a house. It's not a sukkah, and it's absolutely invalid. And Beit Hillel say kosher. Here, the poskim seem to agree that that's already very thick, very dense, and it's only b'diavad that the sukkah is kshera. Tosfos quotes from Medu Tam that if you get to the point where we have such intense and dense schach that if it rains, the rain will not go into your table, then even Beis Hillel would agree it's possible. And this leads us to the Mishnah on the bottom of Chav Beis, Amud Beis. We had a discussion more than once about whether sukkah is a diras keva or a diras aron. Ha'osa sukkah b'rosh ha'gola. Okay, this is what I call the Lubavitch's sukkah. You know, that it goes on the back of a Chabad mobile. So here he's got it on his carriage. Oh, b'rosh hasvina. It's traveling through the seas. So again, you know, whether a sailor or someone in the Navy, how does he fulfill the mitzvah sukkah? Lo pashut. But the Mishnah says ksher. However, the Mishnah goes on to say the olim lo biyant. That mean? I mean, you just finished telling me that the sukkah is valid, it's kosher, so of course I can go in there and yontif. I mean, what? But we'll only understand this with what I call the theory, the methodology of symmetry. What I mean by symmetry is that sometimes, you know, the Mishnah will say something, so it be symmetrical to another part of the Mishnah, which had to say the opposite. And that is Barosh Ha'ilam. If, let's say, he builds a sukkah on top of a tree, like a tree house, or a gabi gamal on top of a camel, the back of a camel, shera, but ein olim la b'yantif. This is a great sukkah for Chol Hamoed, but it's not a good sukkah for yantif of sukkahs. Why? Because the Rabbanan made a gzera, not here in Masechet Sukkah, but in Masechet Shabbos, that ein olim ala ilan or al gabi behema. We're not allowed to have any benefit whatsoever from either a tree or an animal on Shabbos or Yom Tov. You can't lean on a tree. You can't climb a tree. You can't do the same for an animal because the Rabbanan were always afraid that you might come to be tolesh, to rip off a leaf or a branch from the tree. Or if you're riding an animal, you might, as you're riding it, you might come to pluck a branch that's in your way. It's therefore kshera v'yein olim lo b'yantif. So it's a great sukkah for Chol Hamoed, but not for yantif. Dayim ba'ilon v'yachas b'dei adam. He has two of his definas in the sukkah that are in the tree itself. He has one dolphin, the third dolphin that he made. So you can imagine you have two definos that are sitting on the tree, and you have a third dolphin that you extended below the tree. That's called a bidei adam. Oh, shtayim bidei adam, the achas be'ilon. So 2 out of the 3 definos will be man-made. Kshera, but the ain't olim law beyond. We're still considering it as if you are benefiting on Yontif from the tree, even though in this case, shtayim, 2 out of 3 were made bidei adam. But nevertheless, if not for that third dolphin, the sukkah would be psula. You need 3 definos for a kosher sukkah. And his third dolphin is the elon itself. However, says the Mishnah, sholosh bidei adam v'achas elon. Now he's got 3 kosher walls that he himself built. And it's true that the 4th wall is the tree, but that doesn't matter. Why? Because he already has a sukkah kshera independent of the tree, and therefore kshera v'olim la b'yontif. You would not be considered benefiting by going into the sukkah on yontif from the tree, because the sukkah is kshera independent of the tree itself. And here on the top of Chav Gimel, just to finish the Mishnah for today, Zaklal Kol Shi Notela Ilan V'Yachola Lama B'Fnei Atzma Kshera V'Yom La B'Yontif. If, let's say, you can imagine that the tree wasn't there, you still have a sukkah kshera, and you've got 3 definos that support that sukkah, then not only is the sukkah kshera, but Olam La B'Yontif, because it's not considered benefiting from the tree. But if it's, on the other hand, by implication, the sukkah itself requires those definos, that are built in and structured in the tree itself, and without those, he doesn't have a kosher sukkah, then he's not allowed to go into that sukkah on Yontif. It's fine for Chol Hamoed. I just will end the shir with just this one note. Here I have on the bottom, the Mishnah states this general rule to include the case of the sukkah with 2 man-made walls, which are opposite each other rather than at a 90-degree angle. And in that case, the sukkah may be used on Yontif because it would remain standing even if the tree was removed. That's the Chiddush of the Meiri, and this is where we're going to stop for today. So it's Hashem, Lineda, same time tomorrow. Again, you have the Zoom. I want to thank Rabbi Rhodes and everybody else who participated in the Shia today, and B'li Neder tomorrow, Daf Chav Gimel, and everyone should have a great day. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the share.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Oh, good to see you, David.